Hey, it's me, Travis, your host. I'm doing my own pitch. How lame is that? So anyway, yeah, if you listen to this podcast, thanks. But be forewarned, you could be unfriended, unfollowed, and uncompromising if you listen to Rethinking Revelation.
What? Are you kidding? We got us an awesome podcast here.
Welcome back to another exciting adventure of Rethinking Revelation. I'm your host, Travis Finley. Yeah, so here we are. I'm tired. I had a long day. I was stuck in Long Island on 495. There was a trash truck spill. Took up 2 lanes. It was a hazmat thing, sand everywhere. And the car in front of me, as we were sitting there for at least an hour in just dead stop traffic, was an Uber car. And the woman inside was pregnant, and they had to stretcher her out of the car. She was taken, I don't know, maybe she wasn't like in labor before, but the paramedics came, a couple fire trucks came, and they carried her out in a stretcher. And hopefully everything came out all right. But anyway, so yeah, here we are, episode 71.5, and we are continuing the Frederick Faith Debate Program, recapitulation of my interview there with Jace Broadhurst and Troy Skinner, the hosts of Frederick Faith Debate. So we're going to pick up, yeah, we've got a long way to go and miles to go. Sorry, Robert Frost, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'll just stop. I'll just do this. But before we do that, I just have to tell you about this brand new app that John Sedlak turned me on to, because Johnny and I talk quite frequently on the phone, and the stuff that we talk about is often, I think, very profitable for our discussions, but we can't record while we're driving because he is as smart as our smartphones are. If I am on the phone and I try to open up the voice recorder, it won't do it at all, first of all. Second of all, it would only be able to record my voice. Third of all, the ambient noise behind it all would be atrocious. And so Johnny took it upon himself to scour the App Store, and he found Tape a Call, and it is amazing. It's amazing. It's incredible. It does exactly what I wanted it to do, and so now I've got like 20 phone calls that I have to edit, and there's no way I'm going to do it. It's just, but they're there. So Tape a Call. They have a free version. They have a $10 version per year, and it's worth it if you are a podcaster, or I don't know who you are out there, but if you want to blackmail someone, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Tape a Call, awesome. And here's proof with one of the phone calls.
I can't hear. Yeah. Okay, there you are. Yep.
We are recording.
Are we being recorded?
I think so.
Are you recording this?
Well,
Right.
I don't have any way to not record it because there is no stop button for me.
Huh.
It just says conference call, conference, tap to talk, yabba.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So what's up? So what do you got for us to do? All of our good stuff was yesterday. All of our conspiracy theories were yesterday.
Yeah, I know. What can we talk about? Should I test to see if it still records?
I don't know.
When I'm on another app?
Yeah, sure. That would be an interesting, yeah, right.
So let's see if it can do this. So I am technically Hang out the drive. Still that open. So, from everything I know, it's still recording.
Okay.
And I'm looking at my Bible app. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruits of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruits of the tree.'"
I can't handle it anymore. I was like, when you first started reading, I thought, is this an app voice? Because if it is, it's completely insane and awesome, and I want one.
I can do lots of voices.
Oh man, that was beautiful.
But
that was so awesome.
The serpent said to the woman, "You'll not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, knowing good from evil."
If that's not amazing, I don't know what is. That's just fantastic. So tape a call. There you go. Free advertising. And here we go with our regular scheduled program.
Well, we're not going to hear that report from the reporter, but you get the idea. A lot of people talking about the end of the world, and a lot of people talking about when they die, they're going to heaven, or when Jesus comes back, that's when we're going to go to heaven, or whatever, all those sorts of things. Well, when we read the Bible and what it says about the end of the world as we know it, including the tribulation and the second coming of Christ, are we reading history, meaning that it has already happened, or perhaps partially history, with some of it having happened, with more yet to come, or is it all futuristic? Saying it is history is called preterism. Preterism divided generally into two camps, full preterism and partial preterism. Full preterism takes the view that all prophecy in the Bible has been fulfilled in one way or another. Partial preterists take the approach that some, but not all prophecy in the Bible has been fulfilled. This might be kind of overly simple the way I'm putting it here, but I only have so much time. So to expand and explain on today's Faith Debate, Jace Broadhurst and I are joined by Travis Finley, a seminary-trained blogger and podcaster of a program called Rethinking Revelation. And last week we wrapped up in the middle of a thought, but we wrapped up at a point where there were more thoughts about to spill out, and we had to come to a close. And I charged Travis with hanging on to those thoughts for a full week, and he's genius enough that he was able to hold on to those thoughts for a full week.
I feel like we really got somewhere last week, like at the very end, right when we were about to.
It's the way it always happens.
Basically, he said there's parallelism in Isaiah. Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem is the new heavens. This is the creation, this new creation.
Yeah.
Everything else is gone.
Yeah.
That turns the table. That kind of, I see where you're coming from.
So the question becomes: are we going to interpret the Bible consistently, or rather, that's too harsh, isn't it? It's like arguing my view is the biblical view.
Yeah, my view is consistent. Yours is horribly inconsistent.
I want to argue highly for the uniformity of Scripture. Okay, the Scriptures are uniform. That is, what we see in the New Testament is not discontinuous with the Old. Okay. So it's all about context, and I'm going to say that I believe that the historical context within which to understand the entire corpus of Genesis to Revelation is the history of God's operation with Israel under Torah. Okay, so when we read in Matthew 24 Jesus says to his disciples, "Then they will deliver you to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name. At that time there will be many will fall away, will betray one another, hate one another. False prophets will arise and mislead many, because lawlessness increases. Many people's love will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. The gospel of this kingdom shall be preached to the whole oikumene," I'm going to talk about that in a second, "as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." Okay. I said this before, that when we read the Scriptures, we have paradigms in our operating system. We have apps that are running. That when we read a certain passage of Scripture, we have hyperlinks to topics that we think are consistent. This is what this means. This is what this means. That's how we understand the Scriptures. So we don't necessarily always ask ourselves these questions, but the question that I'm going to ask you, if you're going to be looking at Matthew 24, is what end is Jesus talking about? When he says, then the end will come, what is he talking about? When he says, the one who endures to the end, what is he talking about? I think that if we look at the context of Matthew 24, and we look at the disciples' question of Jesus, they ask, tell us when all these things will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. Okay, so the end of the age then defines what Jesus is talking about. I think if we're talking about uniformity, he's not talking about something different than what they're asking. So what are they asking about? Well, in Matthew 23, Jesus delineates his woes against the religious establishment, and he says to the Pharisees that upon your generation, God is going to wreak havoc on your heads for the shedding of prophetic blood. From the time of Abel until now, your fathers have shed the blood of my prophets, my spokesman, right? I mean, just think about it. I have chills right now thinking about all of the parables that Jesus uses when he talks about there's this great king, and he had a vineyard, and he sent out his messengers, and the vineyard tenants killed the messengers. That's what Jesus is talking about. And he says to the Pharisees, you say, well, if we were alive when our fathers were, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. And Jesus says, okay, prove it. Right. The irony. Why are you laughing?
This is right there, yeah.
And they're going to kill him. And he says, okay, prove it. Prove that you are different than your fathers. In fact, Jesus says, I'm going to give you an opportunity. Here's me. Here I am. What are you going to do with me? Kill him. Crucify him. And then he says, I'm going to send you my witnesses. And you're going to pursue them from town to town. And you're going to flog them in the synagogues. Some of them you're going to murder, and some of them you're going to crucify. And I tell you, all of these things are going to come on this generation. That is a huge theological concept that I think gets demonstrated as culminating in the book of Revelation. There are at least 4 passages in the book of Revelation. Chapter 6, I can think of chapter 16, chapter 18, and chapter 19, where and if we're not paying attention, if we think that this is all future, we just think of it as future. But you can't not divorce what follows the Olivet Discourse from the Olivet Discourse. So I have a way of saying it. I say everything after the Olivet Discourse is about the Olivet Discourse. What the Olivet Discourse delineates, we see recapitulated from Acts to Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, this vindication of the martyrs of God, those who were slain for their testimony, happens 4 times in the book of Revelation. To me, that is a huge indicator that when Jesus says, this generation will experience these things. And then in Matthew 24, this generation will not pass away until okay? But the key is this generation. Jesus is saying there's a judgment coming on this generation. The book of Revelation has that same motif, that same theme 4 times.
As a point of clarification, based on what you're saying here about the book of Revelation, you, I guess, hold that the book of Revelation was written within 2 or 3 decades of Christ's crucifixion?
Well, no. I think that it was, again, I'm not an historical theologian. I would say it was probably written as late as 66, as early as 64.
Okay.
But it was written before the
70.
Yes, right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so far, all of the points that you're making, unless I just might be dense, but I'm not seeing any of them unwinding my millennial partial preterist view.
Okay.
So,
right. So that's what I'm saying. That's the coming that Jesus is talking about from the beginning. That's what his coming is.
So is there still anything? So what, I mean...
Yeah, we're in the kingdom. Yeah, we continue to see... Again, this is... Biblical theology shows us what the entire story is about, right? What God does through Israel in typology, right? We talk about... N.T. Wright does this. I mean,
well, with biblical theology, you don't mean people who are biblical in their approach to theology. You're talking about the discipline of how you understand the Bible fitting together. Biblical theology as opposed to systematic theology.
Okay, this is the way I put it. Biblical theology is the cake with all of its decorations and frosting. And systematic theology are the ingredients laid out. So you can see the eggs, you can see the sugar, you can see the baking powder, on and on, okay?
Now, often people will use as interchangeable phrases biblical theology or redemptive historical theology. Are you using it in that sense?
I would be
as well?
comfortable equivocating those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another way I say it is biblical theology is God's presentation of the story. Systematic theology is man's breaking down of that story into categories and themes and whatnot. You would hope that systematics would follow biblical theology. I place biblical theology as predominant over systematics. Systematics should take a backseat.
Yeah, I do too. Although all the systematicians out there, I love you as well.
All right, so let me go back. So understanding the end. What is Jesus talking about? The end of what, Jesus? The end of the world? The destruction of the physical cosmos? How do we understand his terms? So I said that I was going to talk about the word that I chose not to read as world. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world. This is what the ESV says on my text right now. This gospel will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all of the nations, and then the end will come. Okay? If you think that the gospel has to be preached to the whole world before the end comes, guess what? It hasn't come yet, because we still have people who haven't heard of the gospel. We still have possible indigenous nations and people groups that are still cannibalistic and have never heard about Jesus. So of course the end hasn't come, if that's what the text means. However, I believe translation is important. Translation is important. However, we don't have a translation here. We have an interpretation. The translators have interpreted for us what they think the Greek word oikumene means. Okay, so in the Greek, it would read, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole oikumene as a testimony to the nations. So, what does oikumene mean? In the Greek, there's at least two words that are translated world. Cosmos and oikumene. But if you read in the English the same word for those two words, you don't know which one's being used. So you can't delineate, oh, this is oikumene and this is cosmos. So when the census went out when Jesus was born and it went out into the whole world, the word is not cosmos, it's oikumene. That sets the context for where the census took place. I am comfortable saying that the word oikumene should be understood as an empire.
Okay.
So
I'm not challenging. I'm asking for clarifications. I think I'm seeing a hermeneutical inconsistency. When Jesus says generation, he must mean the generation of those who are alive and living right now. But when Jesus says world, he doesn't necessarily mean the whole world. So aren't we picking and choosing which words we're going to take literally?
Depends on how well you argue your case. Okay. I don't want to get distracted with that too much. But to say, all that to say, you have oikumene and cosmos. So you have two different words. Okay? Right. You can't, in my opinion, translate them both with the same English word, because that will influence the way you interpret the meaning of that word.
I think that the translators sometimes do us a disservice when we don't have. It goes both ways. Consistency, where the same word shows up over and over and over again, but it gets translated different ways based on the context of the passage, which makes it difficult for English readers to notice that these same words are showing up over and over and over again. Or they'll take the same word and give it slightly different English words based on the context. And so I agree with you. They give us a disservice, do us a disservice, and make our jobs harder in the world, but I'm still not saying that it's undermining my amillennial view. By the way, this is the Frederick Faith Debate. on 930 WFMD. I'm Troy Skinner. Our guest this week is Travis Finley. He hosts a podcast called Rethinking Revelation. And very quiet this week is Dr. Jace Broadhurst from Poolsville Baptist Church. So anyway, I didn't
No, that's okay.
interrupt, but I have to do that.
I know we're constrained. We're constrained for time. The coming of the Son of Man. I will say that the Bible is uniform. The New Testament is uniform. The
uniform meaning
consistent
in its theme and primary purpose.
Meaning. Yeah. If you start
the
with
Bible's about Jesus, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
You're kind of rolling your eyes.
No. I mean, that's still that's not as there's still that has to be said. I would agree with that, but there's still more. If you start reading in the book of Matthew and you start to study the coming of the Son of Man, I'm going to study this topic, and you write down every occurrence of the coming of the Son of Man, okay? However many they are, I'm going to say I believe they are all the same coming. So when the disciples say to Jesus, "Tell us when all of these things will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" That coming is within the context of every single coming reference that precedes it, because Jesus is talking about the coming of the Son of Man, the coming of the Son of Man, the coming of the Son of Man. So your partial preterism is okay with what I've said so far, because there is good agreement in terms of the way we can understand certain aspects of this. But when we talk about the coming of Jesus, that changes the topic, because what you think about the coming of Jesus and what I'm saying the coming of Jesus is in terms of how I understand the New Testament, that's where we're going to divide. There are certain people that I've talked to who will say, well, this passage here is the final coming, the second coming. This one I can say, okay, this happened in AD 70. And I'm going to say, you can't do that. You can try, but you cannot consistently.
What's the purpose of the second coming in the full preterist view? Jesus came in AD 70 and accomplished what in that coming?
He brought an end to the old covenant system. He brought an end to Torah. Torah is over with. My new metaphor for this is the yellow brick road and the Emerald City. Torah is the yellow brick road. It was intended for you to follow and lead and follow its lead and walk along, and it would come to an end. The problem with the Jews in Jesus' time is they worshipped the law. They made the law the end instead of the means to the end, which is why they killed Jesus.
Doesn't Paul say in his letters that is already true when he writes that we're set free from the bondage to the law?
Yeah, but right. But
and he writes that before AD 70.
Sure.
So Christ.
But you also have Paul offering sacrifices in the book of Acts and paying tribute in the temple. So there are crossover. There's that already not yet kind of transition.
Right. But my understanding is that the set freedom from the law happens at the cross, not 40 years later.
That's where I suppose what we can talk about in that instance is there are shades of fulfillment that don't come to it.
You already mentioned the already not yet is a 40-year process. There is something. There's that crossover.
Yeah. You have the inauguration. Jesus inaugurates the death of the law, so to speak, on the cross. Yes, I agree with that. Right. However, the vindication ultimately of Christ is not the resurrection. It's not the ascension. It's whether or not his words come to pass about the destruction of the temple. The destruction of the temple is the final exclamation point of the story of Torah. The destruction of the temple is an aspect of Torah that couldn't have been accomplished on the cross, because God has seen fit to what Peter says. In the last days, mockers will come and say, "Where's the promise of his appearing? Everything's gone on since the beginning of the world." And Peter says, you don't understand what you're saying. God is being patient with you, not willing that you should perish, not go to hell, perish in the destruction of the temple. So what we have to understand is that there's an aspect of the fulfillment of the law on the cross. There's also an aspect of the fulfillment of the law during the 40-year period. Read Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32, God said that Israel made him jealous by going after false gods. God says in Deuteronomy 32, I am going to make you, my people, jealous by another nation. That happens in the New Testament. The gospel goes out to the nations, and the Jews hate that message. They want to kill Paul because he's going to the Gentiles. So there's an overlap. It's not just a done, one and done. So what I'm going to say, I guess, to try to reiterate is the destruction of the temple is an aspect of fulfilling Torah, because that was the built-in system that God organized. Torah is the yellow brick road, and it comes to an end. When it ends, and you walk past that threshold, you're in the kingdom.
You don't need a sign anymore once you've reached the end of it.
Yeah, now I can tell that Jace is beginning to itch to want to either comment or ask questions for clarification, whatever, but we're running out of time. We'll have to do one more. Right. We usually do about 4 shows in an arc with a panel. I think we're going to maybe do
I'm
one
sorry
more.
I'm not more succinct, guys.
Well, no, it's a big issue, a big question with lots of caveats, and you want to be careful because you don't want the whole world shouting heretic. Unless you are one, then you should be called one, and it can call you back to right thinking. Right? Seriously,
Yeah,
I say that
that's fine.
kind of jokingly, but if I had a view every sort saying heretic, 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 I'd be like, either you guys are all wrong, or, you know what, now that I think about it, yeah, I need to get my views in line. So I think that's where you are, actually. I think that you're... I'm frustrated because you haven't said very much that I feel like doesn't fit my paradigm.
Well, that's great.
So I'm like,
I think that's great.
Why do you feel the need to identify as a full preterist?
Because you think Jesus is coming back, and he's not.
But, okay, I guess I haven't heard... Here are some theological buzzwords for you. Partial preterist, consistent preterist, amillennialism, postmillennialism, covenant theology, dispensationalism, hermeneutic, pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, Armageddon. These words most often come up in the discussion of last things, end times, the end of the world. In other words, eschatology. When study of the Bible for answers to these sorts of questions come up, is it okay to allegorize biblical prophecies, or should things be understood more literally? How allegorically, and why? And how should this be done to remain within the scope of orthodoxy? Participating in this discussion with Jace and me this week is truck driving blogger who attended Reformed Theological Seminary, has his MDiv from there, and he hosts a podcast called Rethinking Revelation, Travis Finley. And he said some things that were rather striking, controversial even, over the last few weeks, and yet I'm not sure why he feels the need to say things in such dramatic, controversial ways, because so far, other than the rhetorical shock factor, which I'm like, well, I can't agree with that because that's just too rhetorically shocking. But when he gets into explaining what he's trying to mean by those rhetorically shocking statements, so far I'm like, I agree with all of that so far. So
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
So-
I don't think it's. I think it actually is kind of shocking. I mean, not for perhaps the people in this room, but some of the things that he's been saying are very strange. I'm sure your listeners are saying, how can you agree with the things that he's been talking about?
Some of them are going to be like that, yeah.
well, I can't agree that Jesus isn't coming back. So,
But
you
you might be able to agree with the way he said. Like, he might still, I mean, we haven't found out. I can't wait to find out the big reveal here, the big apocalypsis, right? He was saying Jesus came back then. That's what he was referring to. He came back in 70 AD. So you might be able to say, to some sense, you would agree with that statement, but you're hoping for more. You would say, okay, if that's the case, if that's what he was referring to by those sentences, by those verses and things like that, then yeah, but still, aren't we still waiting for something else? Isn't there going to be isn't the child going to play by the snake's hole? Isn't there going to be a peaceable kingdom? Aren't all the tears going to be removed from our eyes? Isn't there going to be a tree of life for the healing of the nations? Aren't these all futuristic? Isn't there something else? And now I won't speak again, and Travis will speak.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do with those last couple chapters of Revelation? At least
That's the kingdom. That's the kingdom. And so you have Revelation 21 that says, "Behold, I saw a new heavens and a new earth. The former heavens and the former earth has passed away." Again, that goes straight back to Isaiah 65. Same stuff.
Okay.
Former things. God says, the former things will not be remembered. Okay? What falls underneath that umbrella of former things? I'm going to say Torah. Everything that Torah produces is the former things. Categories, themes, ideas. So that when we are looking at Revelation 21 and we see that there is no more sea, if we don't understand uniformity of language, and we don't understand what the sea represents in the Old Testament, what is it, Jace?
Chaos.
And?
And?
The nations? I mean, that's...
Yeah, you and I have talked about that before. Okay, just keep going. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we see that, I think, in the Old Testament, that the sea is differentiated from the land. The land is representative of Israel, and the sea are the nations. Okay? That consistency, when we go into Revelation 21, after the end of it all, there are no more Gentile-Jew distinctions, because that's Torah. Torah introduced those categories. Torah has come to an end. Therefore, those categories are over with. If death is interpreted in the category or under the umbrella of Torah, then what Torah teaches about death has come to an end. What do you mean? We still die, right? Because that's not what Torah is about. If you look at Psalm 102, I think Psalm 102 is a personification of the temple, and the temple is bemoaning its experience under Torah. And guess what it's doing? It's crying. It's weeping under the constraints of Torah. And that's what Revelation says is gone. There are no more tears.
Now, you brought up temple. First of all, we go on the sea thing. I'm not sure what I think about that. So if somebody doesn't equate the sea with the nations, then that would kind of unravel some of. That's a pretty important presupposition to having a consistent view on Scripture. So,
but it's a predominant view that is out there.
That the
it's
seas
not
are the nations. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not familiar with that, so I'll have to do some study on that. But anyway, the temple imagery is important. I think because I agree. There's temple imagery throughout. I mean, you've got what's happening in Eden, I think, is temple imagery. And then you can see that play out in the construction of the temple with all of the garden imagery and stuff. So there's a temple theme there, and the temple continues. And in Revelation, lots of temple imagery. So from beginning to end and all throughout the middle, lots of temple imagery. But the temple is a type. It's not about the temple. It's about what the temple represents. About getting back to what was available in Eden. At least this is how I've understood it.
Right, and this is another huge jump that I'm going to try to jump in real quick and just throw out again. The opening chapters of Genesis are eschatological. They are talking about Torah. They're talking about Israel under Torah. The temple is a depiction of God's plan in history.
That would only be true if Torah was written late. So you must be believing Torah was written late.
When was the last time the Old Testament was edited?
I wasn't there, so I don't
right.
know.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah, I would put the context of understanding the Old Testament in the exilic period. If you listen to my podcast, I've talked about the crux of interpretation being the prophets. We need to understand the language of the prophets because the prophets are talking about Genesis 1. And they are talking about Revelation 22. It's the same thing.
Right. I think the prophets can be talking about Genesis without Genesis necessarily being like Second Temple literature, for example. I think
it's not that I'm not saying that it's a Second Temple literature. I'm
wrote it or compiled it or had a huge influence on it. And if that's the case, then that predates the temple, the construction of the temple. Right? I'm just trying to get my head around this.
It's okay.
Yeah, well, you're holding to a Mosaic authorship, or at least a fundamental Mosaic authorship.
But getting back to the bigger picture, if the temple represents, what does the temple represent? The Torah?
The temple is a construct under Torah. It's a part of the yellow brick road that is being used by God to move humanity into the future. Keep NT right. Keep all of NT right.
But talking about
jump into preterism
on the Bible, being typology and symbol and stuff. What is the temple meant to symbolize? I take it to symbolize Eden.
The temple is meant to represent God's plan to glorify, exalt, and transfigure humanity into his divine counsel. This world is not our home. We are destined for heaven. But we couldn't get there. There was no human being in heaven until the ascension. Torah is ascension. Torah is all about ascension. Torah was about moving humanity into the future. And God set up, for whatever reason, Torah. And you have the temple, the Holy of Holies, right? The ascension makes no sense. Christ's ascension into the heavens, in terms of what Hebrews tells us, he goes into the actual place, not one made with human hands. Why? Why would he go there as a man unless that's where we're supposed to go? That's what the entire...
now that's where you begin to lose me, I guess, because he goes there to intercede on behalf of those who are his, and then it seems like there's this idea, at least I've always understood this idea that we're not going to go there, he's going to bring it here.
Right, yeah. That's post-millennial, amillennial theology that I don't think is valid. You're working out of the construct
of the New Jerusalem or Heavenly Jerusalem mean?
It's people. It's covenant people. Right, so when you say, isn't he going to bring us back here? Why would he do that? Well, because the new heavens and the new earth. And that's talking about people. That's not talking about the physical orb. And
okay,
so that's the construct that you would be operating under. That's where you and I are talking about talking past each other.
In heaven, in divine counsel with God is in this view that you're talking about.
I didn't hear you.
Everybody ends up in heaven in the divine counsel with God in the end. And what we abandon the planet Earth, we abandon the physical universe.
This is where I don't have all of the answers, and I'm okay with that. But I believe to a certain extent. I have a friend who's a full preterist, and he has gone farther than I have in this discussion with an Eastern Orthodox flavor, and that is that he believes that the saints that have gone before us are actually participating in this world somehow in the unseen realm. That is, in his mind, there is an aspect of this world becoming more heavenized in God's plan, and that's part of it. Okay, that's where he's at. That's farther than where I'm at. I don't know. But I know enough to where I'm saying after we die, that's not the end. And what most people talk about when they talk about the resurrection, you're a full preterist, it means you don't believe in the resurrection. No, I believe in the resurrection, but I believe that was under Torah and has to do with what happened to Israel under Torah. What you're talking about is the ascension, which is what I believe, which is what I'm holding on to. The reason why I have a future hope of life with God in heaven is because of the ascension.
He's Travis Finley. I'm Troy Skinner. This is the Faith Debate on 930 WFMD, and hopefully about to speak, because we haven't heard much from him, is Dr. Jace Broadhurst from Poolsville Baptist Church. You look like you're ready to kind of chime in.
Yeah, but I don't remember what I was going to say.
And
You took it over.
I'm sorry.
Well, I tried to interrupt you. That was my fault. Yeah, the problem with all of this is I keep finding all these little things that I want to nitpick on, and then I realize, okay, that's not that big of a deal. I want to keep moving, but then I'm still stuck on those things.
Right,
so
but those are the good questions that are interesting for discussions, but we don't have that
but with only
freedom.
2 minutes left.
So the kingdom is an aspect, okay? The kingdom is still here. Everything that you want to do in the kingdom, do it. Redeem culture. Transform this world. We talk about that anyway as postmillennialists and amillennialists.
Let's see, because this is going to be, I think, our last show in this arc. We will have you on again. We can pick back up at some point, but we've got about less than 10 minutes now. So I can't figure out if I wanted to agree with you. I'm not saying that I do or don't. I mean, right now I'm not persuaded that I need to. But if I wanted to agree with you, I would feel like I need to have a reason. That there needs to be some necessary reason to throw out all of my training and learning and study and understanding and all these paradigms and these apps that you get referenced in the past about all of these operating system apps rolling in our heads. To replace all of that, I'm just not seeing the reason. Because was there judgment on Jerusalem with the destruction of the temple in AD 70? Yes, and I can say that without being a full preterist. So what is it? What is it that makes you feel compelled that you have to take on the mantle of full preterism? I haven't heard that yet. Like I said, maybe you've said it. I'm just not hearing it.
Because what you would understand and anticipate is the second coming is not. It's the coming on and in judgment on Jerusalem to end the old world. Everything that you say is going to happen in the future has already happened.
Okay, well, that's a pronouncement of an opinion, but it's not an argument to persuade me. So
I have to be general to a certain extent to
why
say.
Why should I expect that it's not going to happen? You say he's
because
not
the New
back.
Testament is not about that. The New Testament is uniformly about the end of Torah.
Okay, so as we're reading Revelation, we're generally looking at Revelation as something that's going to be futuristic, or many people are, or at least some parts of Revelation are the future. What you're arguing is we're misreading Revelation. We should rethink Revelation, for instance. We should say the things that Jesus said, the things that John said, those have been fulfilled. Those already took place. So the questions that we have, maybe I'm asking this question. The questions that we have about the future are still very up in the air. Like, we don't have, because Revelation isn't answering those questions, or these texts
Right. You have to be okay with that tension.
People ask questions like, well, was it evolution, or was there original Adam or anything like that? I'm thinking, I don't know the answers to all of those things. All I'm trying to say is that's not what the text is talking about. The text that's not its issue. It's dealing with something else. So anytime that we come up with things like, well, it says that Jesus is coming back, you say, well, yes, but that's referring to something different. So anything that we're going to talk about from Scripture is culminating in 70 AD. So we could still have questions about a return of Jesus, but we wouldn't be talking about the biblical return of Jesus. We'd be talking about.
And I would ask you, where are you getting this?
Right, we'd be totally speculating. We'd just be making stuff up, like we're just hoping something like that is going to happen. So we could believe it, but you're just saying, yeah, okay, fine, believe it, but it's not based on the Bible. That's not what the Bible is trying to do.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So one of the reactions too is okay, you've asked this. So what now? I mean, what now? That is a non sequitur. That doesn't follow. Is Exodus in the past?
The book of Exodus and what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it have any relevance for us?
Sure.
There you go. There's your answer. Just because the New Testament is closed, just because...
Well, it has relevance because it points to our eschatological hope.
No, we're living in the result of the eschatological hope.
Oh, I hope not.
Well, that's why... That's where, again, the presuppositions, your operating system.
Do you watch cable news?
But think about it. If you were a few generations after the Exodus from Israel or from Egypt, all right, and you look at what God did, it's the same idea to think, well, that's going to happen again. That's what we're doing with the New Testament. Why are you saying this has to happen again? This is about an event that happened in the past.
Yeah, but the Exodus actually gives us the Exodus event gives us a pretty good example of this, because you kind of wanted to toss out the already not yet thing. But I think there's an example of that for us right there in the Old Testament. When the people, when the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, they were already delivered. They were already free. And yet, they were not in the promised land for another 40 years. They're already free, and yet, so I think it's right there, and there's an echo of that what we're living out right now, where we're already free. Christ has already died on the cross for us, and yet, from my point of view, he hasn't returned yet. So we're living.
Return to do what?
So we're still living in that 40 year to usher us into the promised land, the new Jerusalem.
That's where we are. We're in the kingdom. The kingdom came. That's the whole language. That's where you've got your operating system giving you categories that conflict with what I'm saying.
It's established, but it's not fully consummated.
That's your operating system.
But you said keep Tom right.
Right, but you have to go past Tom Wright. You have to. He's on the
Jesus
cusp.
Coming and bringing things back to rights. That's what we're looking for. That's his phraseology.
Yeah, but right. I can only say so much.
Right.
But I'm saying yes. Tom Wright is right, but he hasn't gone far enough. Which is it's crazy. I'm like looking at this. Why which makes it. Step. Which is like me. I'm like, who am I? He's N.T. Wright.
Right.
Who am I to say he's not gone far enough? But that's where you're at. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. But that's it. So the tree of life. You bring up the tree of life. Okay, the tree of life is the kingdom. It's the king. That's why I'm saying to you that Genesis 2 is eschatological. Genesis 2 is Torah leading to the tree of life. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is Torah. Read Deuteronomy 30 and read Luke 15 with the parable of the lost son. The parable of the lost son is Jesus's midrash, commentary, interpretation of Deuteronomy 30. Deuteronomy 30 is the context to understand Genesis 2. Moses says, I've set before you the law. I've given you the law. I have set before you life, and I've set before you death. Therefore, choose life. Okay? The law is all about leading up to life. They didn't have it. They cried out for it. They were under anguish for it over and over and over again. They did not have life until Christ. Christ brought the end of the law, and he brought the kingdom. He brought the tree of life. He brought that which is healing for the nations. Because we don't see this world transformed, guess whose fault that is?
Maybe it's
ours.
Maybe it's just a hair split on word choice or something. But I don't understand the Bible. In Matthew, Jesus doesn't say that he came to end the law. In fact, he goes out of his way to say, I have not come to end the law, I've come to fulfill it. And he goes on to amplify the requirements of the law, making it even harder.
No, see, I disagree with that. You have to listen to my podcast on Matthew 5. He comes
Jesus doesn't say he didn't come to end the law, I come to fulfill it?
Okay,
that's a quote, I think.
Okay, no. Fulfillment is ending. It's bringing it to its completion. It's the yellow brick road. The yellow brick road is fulfilled when you cross the threshold and walk into the kingdom, into the Emerald City. That's fulfillment. Christ comes to bring it to an end. So if you want to quibble about about my saying end, the telos is all throughout the New Testament. The telos. Maturity. In the Old Testament, we were children. Now we are mature.
I'm good with that.
And we're being made into the image of Christ. And that is what is eschatological. Genesis 1, 2, and 3 begin the story of what God is doing in humanity through Israel. He chooses Israel, depicts to them what history should look like, and they refused to move into the future when Christ came. But the future came anyway, and they lost out.
I feel like we have another cliffhanger, but we have no more shows. So anyway, thank you, Travis Finley, for being on. Jace Broadhurst, thank you again, my friend. Thank you to our sponsors, Hilo Auto Sales and Tire Pros of Frederick, and thank you for listening. Again, visit us online, wfmd.com, keyword faith. I'm Troy Skinner, and
All right. Well, hopefully you could tell that we were enjoying ourselves talking about the end times, the second coming, eschatology, and the fulfillment of all things in the kingdom of God in Christ. I'm hoping that we can pick that conversation back up and finish a lot of stuff that still needs to be talked about because it's such a very broad subject. I really think that so many people are able to be persuaded from different arguments, and it's not just everyone is persuaded by the same explanation for why you believe this or why you believe that. So I think the conversation is important to have and important to carry on, and I think that we showed that we could be amicable and hospitable to each other. All right, so that's it. Yeah, there you go. I'm Travis Finley, your host with Rethinking Revelation. Visit us on Twitter, Rethinking Revelation, Facebook, same thing, and rethinkingrevelation.com. Please visit on iTunes and review. Even just say good show, bad show, I don't care, just as long as there's traffic, and give us some feedback. All right? Until next time.